Tissue Box Channel presents a short story by George Trombley. SARAX, Chapter 1. The collision alarm hasn't gone off in the last 2 years, even once. The collision protocols had already opened up the sleep bay and lit the entire room in a bright white light. As was customary, the pilot always had their quarters immediately next to the control room. I jumped into the closest force equalization suit, or FES-3 as we call it since this was the third rendition of this particular model, and sped walked towards the exit of my quarters. It was against protocol to run no matter what the emergency was. 3 years of training made it clear to all trainees that running never improved the outcome. I swiveled my control chair towards me and strapped in. The motion controls aren't responding. Something's seriously wrong, besides the collision, that is. With a large thump, Melanie also jumped into her control seat and yelled to me over the alarm. "What are you waiting for?" "Controls aren't responding, Mel," I said as calmly as I could while screaming. "What do you mean they aren't responding?" Melanie asked as she hurriedly searched through the status screens tracking the object heading towards us. "It's huge. Something this big would have shown up hours ago on LROD." LROD was short for Long Range Object Detector. Turning to me, she screamed again. "Move it, Suri!" I know. Give me a minute." I scream as I rotate the power vector dial frantically to the left and then to the right, to no effect. "We don't have a minute," Melanie screamed in my ear again. Nothing made sense. We should have been starleaping while we slept, and not dead in space. Why aren't we moving? "Reinitialize!" Melanie yelled, snapping me out of my thought. I immediately reach under the console and pull the reinitialize sequence lever. The collision alarm's pitch continued ramping upward as the huge rock got closer. It was now at its max pitch. I screamed, "Brace for impact!" We were both already strapped in. There wasn't anything else we could do to brace except pressing our bodies into the back of the control seats. After what seemed like forever, the panel finally lit green with the words "System Ready," which felt quite out of place with all of these collision alarms. I rotated the dial again. "Fuck! Nothing's happening!" "Why aren't we moving?" Melanie screamed again, sounding more like a hurt animal than the level-headed engineer I've known for the last 2 years. To be fair, I'm sure I didn't sound much better myself. Then I remembered. Yes! I press all 5 fingers to the screen, revealing the system engine safety interlocks, and smash the engine PMI disengage button. The engines instantly spooled up, and, as if it had a mind of its own, my right hand twists the power vector dial again, and the deafening sounds of the engines now filled the entire vessel. My training kicked in, and my other hand pulled the motion throttle back to its max thrust position. Just as our bodies begin to press deep into the seats, the FES-3 suits react with a whooshing sound, and all the pushing force immediately eases from our bodies. Luckily, I had trained for a max thrust scenario, and I didn't overcompensate to the initial acceleration pressure. Any overreaction would have caused me to possibly push the thrust lever forward, thus reversing our trajectory and preventing our escape. I continued a steady, hard pull on the motion throttle while my left foot jammed the left thruster to the metal, as they used to say, and we veered sharply to the right. The FVS-3 continued doing its job and kept my position stable despite the tremendous amount of pressure on my body. For a moment, I thought we would clear the rock, but the rock clipped the back end and we veered violently to the left, still at max thrust. Still using the muscle memory of the 3 years of training, I pushed the motion throttle toward the control panel but let go just before the midpoint. As designed, the motion throttle stopped at the midway point and the engines disengaged. The pod was spinning counterclockwise at 89 RPM according to the status panel. "Stop the spinning before I throw up," Melanie begged. "Just close your eyes," I said, knowing that the FVS would make her feel as if she was standing still. It was her brain making her feel sick looking at the stars spinning around. I brought up the 3-finger menu and clicked the auto-stabilize icon, and the ship initiated a series of calculated rocket thrusts. And, before long, the rotation stopped. "Okay, you can open your eyes," I said, but Melanie was already flipping through the status screens. She dismissed all but the major ship interlocks, which were still lit a bright red. "We won't be able to starleap anytime soon," she reported, followed by, "Nice work, Suri. Good thing you remembered we were in periodic maintenance mode. Well, if it weren't for the collision alarm waking us up, the PMI would already have been over, and we would have been starleaping already. Well, the PMI explains why we didn't see the rock until it was so close, but it doesn't explain why long-range object scanners didn't scan it prior to the PMI, Melanie said, not looking up from the interlock screen. We had better get started. I unstrapped from the control chair and transferred the interlocks to the mobile control pad. Let's go then, I said as I stood up. We have had failures of individual components over the last few years, but now 8 systems were down with major interlocks. Interlocks were the vessel's way of preventing us from killing ourselves. Minor interlocks could easily be bypassed. These were things such as food printers or, strangely, anything to do with life support. You would think life support issues would create major interlocks, but not having food for a few days wouldn't mean immediate death. The ion thrusters and other units controlling motion, on the other hand, all had a danger of exploding, causing catastrophic failure to the vessel. Because of this, if any number of conditions failed the safety logic check, they would interlock and refuse to operate until those conditions are removed. It's almost as if the entire ship was designed not to move. The interlock system always felt a bit controlling. It always reminded me of my mother constantly making me put on a hat when the temperature dropped below 70 degrees. After 3 hours of crawling through the underbelly of the ship and using almost every type of scanner available to us, we were able to bring 7 systems back online and clear their associated interlock. The final remaining interlock, although a major one, actually didn't prevent us from motion control, but it would prevent the ship from sustaining a starleap without overheating the main booster. Both of us understood the problem and even could have repaired it if we had replacement parts. Normally, following standard protocols, we would simply print new parts for the damaged regenerative cooling system. But the slide rail of our only PGP, part generation printer, was also damaged during the collision. You would think someone would have thought to have an extra PGP on board for this exact scenario, Melanie said over the internal intercom from her quarters. For the last 2 years, or years I should say, Melanie and I often rambled on the II for hours before sleep. Sometimes we would read stories to each other, paying great attention to properly voice each character in the story. Melanie was right. It would be nice to have an extra PGP, but I knew we didn't. Reaching over for my glass of water, I answered Melanie's gripe. Or maybe we should have printed extra PGP parts before it broke as a precaution. Well, once we fix the cooling, I'll design a procedure that prints duplicates on the PGP and transmit them to the O-Week's progress update. The II automatically added the task to her to-do list. It was actually really convenient having the II listen to everything, and it certainly made communication between the two of us much cleaner. After all, it's hard to continue an argument when the person you're arguing with can easily play back the entire conversation that caused the argument in the first place. I'm still pretty upset about the time I was sure I had requested that Melanie recalibrate the Quad 2 forward sensors. But the II played the conversation back where I clearly said Quad 2 starboard sensors. I was so certain I was correct. I didn't even want to let Melanie play back the conversation. But in typical Melanie fashion, she promised to home cook meals for 3 days if I was right. I couldn't resist the possibility of another home-cooked meal. Even though the food reps do an amazing job at producing exact dishes, nothing compares to a meal created with just the raw ingredients. Humans' lack of perfect timing, coupled with imprecise amounts of spice, give the food character that the food reps just can't duplicate. And even though the II proved I was wrong, Melanie, being a good sport, still prepared my favorite dish, miso ramen with a side of gyoza that night. She even made the noodles by hand, using the individually printed raw ingredients. Melanie sighed. The PGP is a problem, but the bigger problem is our cooling. We won't be starleaping without that. Well, I guess we'll just have to standard thrust our way to the nearest garage, I joked. In reality, we were 50 light years away from any such garage. Even though, for us, only 2 years of time had passed, we were 50 years from the nearest dock, and even much further from Earth. Each night, or O-night as we call it, once we had finished talking, we initiate the deep sleep protocols. Initiating them used to be a tedious process until Melanie designed her nighty-night procedure. The procedure auto-calculated the time left until we needed to wake, which allowed our conversations to go longer if needed some nights. It also automatically prepared the sleep pods and began a host of ship tasks that happened only on certain O days of the O week. I wouldn't call Melanie lazy, but anything with more than one step, and Melanie would spend days, if not months, writing automatic procedures to make it just one step. Deep sleep protocols allowed for us to live a normal feeling life. Each of our nights felt like a normal 8 hours, but on an Earth timescale was more close to 200 hours, or just over 1 week. These huge time differences initially made for confusing conversation when discussing time. For example, our O weekly reports are submitted according to our weeks and not Earth's. This means that on the last day of the O week, which we still affectionately call Sunday, we submit the report. But in Earth time, if you account for the 16 hours we are awake, our week is actually 63 days in Earth time. To prevent confusion, we refer to one of our days as an O day and our weeks as an O week. The O is short for hour, and it's attached to any time that is distorted due to the sleep protocols. An hour is still an hour, but days, months, and years are relative to us, so they are always called O days and O weeks, etc. Melanie snorted a bit and laughed at the absurdity of us heading to a garage. I immediately followed up her snort with a serious question. How can we repair the cooling infrastructure without parts? Melanie's silence meant she was thinking. I have learned not to interrupt Mel when she's thinking. It's really the only time I've ever seen Melanie get mad at me. She believes that if you open your mind, an answer is bound to arrive. But any disruption might allow her to miss the answer. We have no choice, Melanie said flatly. We have to repair the PGP. How do we do that without a working PGP? We'll do it the old-fashioned way, she said matter-of-factly. We'll have to print a forge and smelt a new printer head slide rail. The slide rail was arguably the most important part of the PGP. For each generation process, the printer head would slide across it thousands of times, laying rows of thin, heated materials with widths less than a human hair. Without a working slide rail, no printing would be possible. Is it possible to replicate a part that matches the current slide rail specs? I asked. We will see. We certainly have enough raw materials to build multiple rails until we get it just right. I could easily imagine seeing Mel shaving precision angles into a new slide rail. I don't think I've ever heard Melanie say something is impossible. In the most dire of circumstances, the worst she would say is, it would be challenging. Melanie answered my question. It will be challenging. Oh? I prompted for more details. We won't be able to build or use a forge in the ship. It would be too dangerous as we would have to disable too many safety systems. Our only option is to land. Land? I yelped. But the ship is designed for star mapping. Our mission statement doesn't say anything about landing, nor do we have the protocols. Well, the mission statement also didn't plan for a broken PGP or building a forge on board. And as for protocols, we'll come up with our own. Just then, the sleep protocol buzzer calmly sounded, informing us that nighty-night mode would commence in 5 minutes. I heard Melanie sigh again. We probably should cancel the sleep protocols for now. Why? Well, it doesn't make sense to sleep for 200 hours when the ship isn't even starleaping. How about we try sleeping like normal human beings again? And when we wake up, begin searching for a candidate moon. Or better yet, a planet with a breathable atmosphere. I thought for a second, but as always, her logic was dead on. Okay, let's do it. Such a fundamental protocol such as the sleep protocols aren't easily canceled with just voice commands over the II. We had to open up and navigate through 5 various finger menus until we got to a well-hidden menu allowing us to disable the sleep protocols. Well, see you tomorrow, Suri. Sleep tight, Melanie said in a sweet voice.